Hey guys, it's Rich Boy J here back in with another video, and this is going to be episode 20 of Your Questions Answered. Before I get into the actual video, I just want to say, once again, I'm urging you guys to submit custom intros for these videos. I would love to see something creative. Use it as an opportunity to just promote your channel. I don't care. If it's cool, I will put it at the beginning of these videos. So, didn't have one this week, but I'm hoping that moving forward, we can get more of those on these videos. So, if you don't know what your question answered, it is very simply a Q&A series here on this channel where you submit your questions in the comment section. Make sure it's Lego Star Wars or Lego Star Wars related, and if it makes the cut, you'll see it in next week's video. Let's go on to the question. First question comes from, should I even bother with a username? That's an important question. He says, would you like a live-action Clone Wars movie with CGI Count Dooku similar to Tarkin in Rogue One? I'm guessing by CGI Count Dooku, you mean like them putting Christopher Lee in as Count Dooku, and I've been saying for the longest time that I would love to see them do a live-action Clone Wars movie. I think for no other reason than it'd be a great opportunity for Disney to show a good interpretation of Anakin and Obi-Wan as, you know, Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen, just to, I don't know, give us like fond memories of those two on screen together. I don't really like the direction that George Lucas went with them and the portrayal of those characters in those original prequel movies, but I think that they are both fine actors and they could have a very powerful performance as those two characters under the right direction. So I am all for something like this. I think that it would be cool to also just see a lot of our familiar Clone Wars elements done in the new cinema style with new technology. Like ILM does such a good job on the special effects, and I don't think that this movie would be any exception. So it's been a while since we've seen a large-scale battle on the screen. What better way to do it than to do some sort of Clone Wars arc or battle in a film, in a live-action version. So yeah, I'm all for this, and I honestly would prefer this over them going back and doing the animated Clone Wars series. So fingers crossed, maybe it'll happen someday, but the time is kind of ticking where we're in a position where, you know, Anakin and, Ewan and Hayden are still of the correct age to be able to portray those characters. But, you know, as time goes along, they're going to get older and they won't be able to play those characters. So hopefully that does happen sooner rather than later. Next question comes from Darth Thomas Mueller, 17. He says, do you want LEGO to make more Chrome figures, and who do you want to be made? This is a great question. The Chrome figures are some of the best minifigures that we get. The Chrome C-3PO is probably the god among these figures, and it's not even the most detailed. Like the TC-14, I would argue, is a better looking figure than that Chrome C-3PO, but obviously the fact that the Chrome C-3PO is much harder to get than the TC-14, I understand why it commands such a high price. But yeah, we absolutely need more Chrome figures. Like, I think TC-14 might be the last Chrome Star Wars figure that we got, and that was like at least 3 years ago, so we are way overdue for one. I think Phasma is probably the leading candidate for this. Obviously, C-3PO is up there. I think that those two are probably the most important ones that we can get, and I really do hope that LEGO decides to do it at some point soon. Next question is going to be by the Lego Seraph. He says, what type of large Star Destroyer style cruiser/Corvette class ship do you think LEGO will most likely make next, and what would you want? I think just judging on like the kind of trend of things, the most reasonable one to guess would probably be the Imperial Star Destroyer, just because LEGO's kind of been doing a lot of re-releases, or remakes rather, of those like originals UCS sets. Star Destroyer would be a front runner moving forward. I mean, it still holds up, like it's my favorite Lego set, but obviously there are so many new types of pieces that they could do. It has a lot of studs, so I'd imagine they would kind of get rid of a lot of that. And it was such an iconic set. It's worth so much nowadays that Lego would want to capitalize on that, same way they've done with the Millennium Falcon and Cloud City. So I think just seeing the trend of things and the types of UCS sets they've released recently, the Imperial Star Destroyer is probably the front runner. As for what I would like to see, because I do like that original Star Destroyer set so much, if LEGO were to make a set, I honestly would love to see the First Order Star Destroyer be made into a set. It's visually a more interesting ship than the original Star Destroyer. That's not to say that it's like looks cooler, but there's just a lot more variances in the design, like the fact that it has the big TIE Fighter hangar kind of move along the sides of the front, and I really just do love the shape of it, the kind of layered approach as you move towards the top of the ship. I don't know, I would just love to see LEGO come up with a big UCS version of that. So yeah, out of any of the Star Destroyer types of vehicles, the First Order one would be my personal suggestion for them to make for the next UCS set. Next question is by Integral Bricks Lego Creations. He says, Jay, what are your opinions on the pros and cons of mocking a Star Wars landscape versus a vehicle? I've kind of touched on this, but I think I'd like for this answer to be the definitive place on my opinion on this. So we will start with the landscape. The pros of the landscape is you aren't beholden to exact reference material. Like the ship obviously has very specific specifications, and you can pretty much see all of the ship in one picture. There's no real guesswork involved in it. So with landscape, you have a lot more freedom to just design things and be a little bit more creative. Whereas with the ship, you pretty much have to be you'd pretty much have to adhere to the source material. As for the cons of doing a landscape, it's usually a lot bigger than a ship. You just have to cover so much area with it, just depending on the scale you're doing. Obviously, at the scale that I do a lot of things, the landscape ends up being much bigger than the ships, and the ships themselves are pretty big. So you just end up, having to build a lot more out with the landscape. Landscapes can also become very monotonous just because, that's kind of the nature of it, right? You have to build something that is relatively uniform in itself. And it can get kind of monotonous. The rock work we had to do for Crate just got to be such a drag at one point, just because we were just building so much of it. As for the ship, kind of the reverse of that, because you're designing something that probably isn't all the way uniform. It can be a lot more exciting to work on just because you don't get bored with it. You're probably not building a lot of the same thing, which is usually nice. Ship builds also are very contained, right? So you can have a ship build and you can sit it on a shelf, and it usually can fit very well, which means that ship builds can oftentimes be kept over long periods of time. If you even look at my collection, when it comes to the MOCs that I build, the ships are usually the things that I keep, whereas the landscapes end up getting scrapped for future projects just because landscapes are much bigger typically and require so much more space. As for the cons of doing a ship, obviously you pretty much have to adhere to the reference material, so you don't really get too much freedom. And the thing about ships is if you don't have it correct, if you don't adhere to the reference material enough, then one small thing can be off, and then that just throws the entire design of the ship off, whereas you get a little more freedom than building a landscape. So those are my thoughts on it. As for which one I would prefer, it really just depends on how I feel. I feel like I go back and forth on which one I prefer working on. Sometimes landscapes are fun to work on because you don't really have to think about it too hard. You just come up with a few designs and you just replicate them throughout. But then sometimes ships are fun to work on because you get to keep it after you're done with displaying it wherever you're going to display it at. Next question comes from Ben the Brick Builder. He says, what is the figure you have the most of? How many do you have? And if you could have any lightsaber, what would it be? Those are two very different questions in there, but as for which figure I have the most of, I think it won't come as a surprise to you guys, but it is definitely the standard First Order Stormtrooper. Brickset says I have 150 of these. This isn't including a lot like the ones with the pauldrons or any variations on it, or the heavy gunner ones, because I have a bunch of those as well. But yeah, the standard First Order Stormtrooper is the figure I have the most of. I think that's a question I wanted to posit to you guys. Leave in the comment section, what figure do you guys have the most of? And then moving on to the second part of your question, you asked, what lightsaber would I like to have? I'm guessing you mean as a prop or a replica. Luke's lightsaber from Return of the Jedi is my favorite lightsaber, so if I got to have the FX version of that, for example, that would be the one that I would pick out of any of the other ones. The next question is by Crazy Wookie. He says, what's the hardest thing you've ever had to build? Oh my god. So the thing that was the hardest for me to build, without question, was one of the front legs of the AT-M6. I know you'll probably look at it and it doesn't look super complicated, but it was just so hard for me to find a starting point for that. The hardest thing for me oftentimes when I'm building is just to find a starting point. Where do I want to begin with this? I don't want to get in a position where I'm working on something that just doesn't work out at all. I want to make sure wherever I start, it's something I know can work. And you have to figure out all your limitations with the design. So that can oftentimes be the hardest thing. And it just took such a long time for me to figure out, okay, this is where I want to start with this thing, just because so many different types of the designs in it on all four sides of it. So it took me a while to figure that out, but I'm happy I did. And I think that it came out pretty well. Last question is by Admiral Radis. He says, do you think we'll get more Solo or Rogue One sets because they seem to stop them after initial 2 release waves? So that's actually a really good question. Rogue One really just got 2 waves and we haven't gotten a set since then. If the rumors are to believe, if the rumors are to be believed that we're going to get that Darth Vader castle set, and I presume that it's going to be in Rogue One like theme, just because that's the only place we've ever seen it, then that would like answer your question definitively. But we don't really know for sure that we're going to get that. But I think that like that's Disney and Lego's just general approach to these spin-off, just because, you know, we get so many films that it would be a lot for them to, you know, try to squeeze in more of the like the new film sets into waves that aren't like that initial wave, and then also squeeze in sets from like the prequels and the original trilogy. We're getting so many sets nowadays, and as new movies continue to come out, like it's not gonna get any easier for them to try to, you know, like throw in sets from any given movie. So they have to, you know, like pick and choose what they decide to do. And obviously with the Clone Wars coming out, Resistance coming out, the live action Star Wars series coming out, there's going to be so many sets, and I'm actually really interested in seeing how LEGO decides to manage that. So yeah, I really don't envy the person who has to decide what types of sets they're going to come out with, just because there's so much new material coming out. That's honestly one of the reasons I do hope that, you know, Disney slows down with the frequency of movies. I would honestly not mind if they took a year or two off, like after episode 9 comes out, just to kind of give us some time to refresh, take the new trilogy in, and, you know, they can supplement the time with things like the cartoons or the live action series. But when it comes to the big films, I'm buying just so many Lego sets nowadays. It'd be nice to have a break from the new movies, and, you know, even give Lego a chance to maybe put out a few more sets from the movies that we already have, and not have to continually be pumping out like sets from new reference material. So that's gonna finish up the video, guys. I really hope that you enjoyed it. If you want to see your questions answered on this series, just go ahead and leave it in the comment section. Make sure it's Lego Star Wars or Lego Star Wars related. If it makes the cut, you'll see it in the video next week. Like I always say, guys, if you like what I do, go ahead and support the video by smashing the like button, support the channel by smashing the subscribe button, and I will see you guys very soon.